I don't believe in exam grades because life is not an exam, life is a project. And when you work on a project, you make mistakes, you get things wrong, but you correct it, reflect on it, try and do a little bit better, as you would any project.
So my very first question to you is, can you describe who you are and what you do?
Who I am, that is a very broad question. 24601, that's a Les Miserables reference. Who am I? I am British, I'm a man, I am 40 years old, I am a huge sci-fi and musicals and fantasy nerd. I'm a gamer. I'm incredibly unfit and healthy, and I'm also an educator.
So what made you decide to start teaching English in Singapore?
So that's a very interesting story. So I decided, I had been working on the cruise ships for about 3-4 years, and I kind of knew by my mid-20s that I wanted to become a teacher, but I didn't know the avenue to become a teacher. And also I wanted to keep the traveling aspect in my life. I didn't want to become a teacher in the UK. God, how teachers teach in the UK. They're superheroes. So I did a training course in London. It was a month long, one of the best months I ever had in my life because it was just so fast and so intensive. And it was so exciting. And then I started looking for my first job. Now, I knew from the beginning it was going to be in Asia because I'd never been to Asia before. And I was initially looking at Hong Kong. But I put my CV on a job portal website for teachers, and a teacher here, an owner of a English enrichment organization here in Singapore contacted me and said, would you consider Singapore? So I interviewed, and then I knew nothing of Singapore. Everything I knew of Singapore was pre-1945. I knew nothing of modern Singapore. So I spoke to some friends who had worked at Universal Studios. I spoke to my mum, who had also been to Singapore on holiday, and they said, go, don't give it a second thought, go to Singapore. And so I came here with the intention of being here for 2 years and then going back to Europe. And now I've been here 11.5 years, and boy, has that been a journey. I came here as a teacher, I've been a teacher trainer, I've taught various subjects from French to individuals and societies. I've taught 2.5 to 12, I've taught teenagers like yourself, I've taught adults. Yeah, it's been one hell of a journey.
You said you chose Asia because you've never been to Asia. And then after that, you sort of eased into it after some people spoke to you about it. Your mother, she sounds like a very supportive person.
Yes, she definitely is. She's a boomer. She's 78 now. And she didn't have any sort of the educational opportunities that you and certainly I have had. And her philosophy, certainly when I was growing up with her and my siblings, was do what you enjoy. There was never any sort of pressure to do any sort of high salaried occupation like medicine or finance or law or anything like that. Her philosophy was always do what you enjoy and you will do well at it. And then something that I've always admired about my mum is, considering that she never went to university or anything like that, she built her own business in her 50s. She was a stay-at-home mum. She began her career as a preschool teacher when I was at preschool. And then after my dad died in the mid-90s, she decided to make her own preschool, and it's now in its 30th year. And my sister now runs it. So I come from a family of educators. But my mum was able to build that business from scratch with no sort of MBA or anything like that. It was because of her love of children and her love of teaching that business thrived.
I think she's an amazing person, and I don't think I'll ever meet her, but if I do, we would have a pretty interesting conversation. I'm sure she can give me some knowledge, you know.
I'm sure she'll tell you a lot of stories about me as well.
Okay, let's move on to the third question. As a student of yours, I understand your love for history, but why did you choose English and French instead of history in university?
Oh, that's such a good question. So I am a millennial and I come from the British school system. So that's not too dissimilar from the Singaporean system, which is O levels and JC and that kind of thing. In the UK, it's GCSEs and then A levels. And so at the age of 14, do you choose your subjects that you're going to do for your GCSE exams, the exams you take when you're 16? And back when I was at school, you had, and I went to a grammar school, which is, it does all the higher level kind of subjects. So I did English language, English literature, maths, all three sciences. So I did physics, biology, and chemistry. And then you had your electives. So you had to choose one modern foreign language, you had to choose one technology, and then two other electives. I chose French, I chose ICT, I chose German, and I chose geography. Now, why is that? Well, again, thanks to my mother, when I was a kid, she would buy me encyclopedias and atlases, and I would always have my nose in one of those big, massive books, just learning about the world. But also being someone that's come from the British education system, my thinking was put in a direction of do what's valuable to the economy, to the nation, to the society. There was no sort of attitude of do what you love. It was do what's going to be most useful to you in the future. And so sadly, I dropped history and I regret that decision even now. But I chose subjects that were worldly, so languages and geography, with the hope of seeing the world. So that's why I did French. And then university, when I was looking at universities, I always knew I wanted to do French because the jump from GCSE to A level, so 16 to 18, was huge. And I went from being an A student in French, nearly an A star, I went from being an A student in French at GCSE to a C student at A level. So that gives you an idea of how big the jump was, and I struggled. And so I set myself the challenge of I want to be able to speak this language. I want to be able to speak French fluently. So I decided to do French at university. And then when I was looking at universities, I was basing my decision on which city would I feel comfortable. I wasn't looking at Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, NUS. I wasn't looking at that. I was like, which city will I feel comfortable in? Because French is French no matter what city I go to. And so I went to Brighton University for the reason that it offered French with English literature. And English literature is kind of where I've still been able to keep my toe in studying history, because you look at socio-historical context and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's why I did French and English literature.
I find that really interesting about you because based on what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Your worldview towards these things is not what society expects me to do, but rather what I feel would be the best for myself. And when you said that you chose French because you wanted to challenge yourself, or you chose a university not because someone else told you to choose that university, but because you found it comfortable, I find it very interesting, you know?
I think that's part of the society I'm from. You have to remember that the UK it's a small country, but it's bigger than Singapore. But as a society, British people tend to be brought up to fly the nest. So your parents help you grow up, but then you fly the nest and go and do your own other things. You make your own money, you buy your own house and that kind of thing. So it's kind of natural in the UK that young people go to other cities for their university education. And as I say, comfort was a big one for me, because and now this is where the teacher's going to come out and tell me, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you're not comfortable, safe, or secure in where you are geographically, emotionally, mentally, you can't pursue your other interests and hobbies and that kind of thing, or take things from it happily. Choosing a city that I would be comfortable in was a key thing for me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like listening to yourself is also a very important skill. Because sometimes you let people just talk into your ear and you listen to all that, you absorb it, you say, yeah, you're completely right. Well, sometimes you should listen to yourself. You know yourself the best.
Well, again, I think my mother was very pragmatic, because my father died when I was very young. So my mother was very pragmatic in that she knew nothing about universities. She knew nothing about secondary education. So she wasn't in a position to give good advice or good direction on what to do or where to go. So her philosophy was very, very basic. Do what you enjoy.
Let's move on to the fourth question. Before teaching, you worked on a cruise ship and you traveled to many different places. How did this experience shape how you see the world?
Two things come to mind with this one. The first is not judging a place by its history, and it is a sort of akin to not judging a book by its cover. I'll give you an example. In my first year on the cruise ships, there was an itinerary. It's called the Black Sea itinerary. And we started off in Rome, and we went to Istanbul, we went to Romania and Ukraine. And I remember this very, very well. I remember looking at that itinerary and thinking, why are we going to these places? It's one of the best cruises I've ever done, because the expectations was very low, but the places we went to were beautiful. Istanbul in Turkey was gorgeous. Sevastopol in the Crimea and Odessa in Ukraine were gorgeous places, and with what's happening in the world at the moment with the Russia and Ukraine war, it's sad what's happening, because I've been there and had an amazing time there. And I judged those places because I thought, old Eastern Europe, there's probably still going to be the remnants of Soviet Union there, it's not going to be a very modern place. But it was beautifully historic, beautifully cultural. Especially Istanbul. Istanbul was marvelous. The other thing is that the most idyllic places on this earth are the ones with the least resources, or the least modern. And I think of the Caribbean. I have had some of the best times of my life in the Caribbean. And they're not theme parks or MBS style hotels or five Michelin star restaurants and all these mod cons. These are shacks with white sandy beaches that were calming and beautiful. So although living in Singapore is very safe and comfortable and secure, some of the best places to visit on this planet are the ones that don't have all these resources and available.
I think I might differ a little bit, because I'm a little bit afraid to travel to a different country or to live alone, and I don't know. I'm just not the kind of person who's independent enough to leave. So how did you feel when you were traveling around, the globe, around the world?
Because I studied in France for a year during my university career, that was kind of a precursor for me traveling the world later on. That was kind of my first step into living away from home. And what made it manageable, comfortable, was the people around me. I had some wonderful friends that I'm still in touch with now. And on the cruise ships in particular, you're living in a very, very cramped environment, and you are with each other 24/7. Now, I don't know about you, but you and your friends, have you ever thought, can I live with this person 24/7?
Andrew, do you think you can live with me 24/7?
Well, I feel sorry for your younger brother.
But you learn to adapt. You learn to adapt. And if you're expecting a 5-star lifestyle in this sort of environment, yeah, you're not going to enjoy it. It's hard work. It can be rough. Some of the places are not, not every port I went to was a safe port or a particularly good port. But one of the good things about it is that, especially with the cruise ships, is that the cruise ship literally does become your home. So there's always that safe place to come back to. But yeah, you do learn to adapt very, very quickly.
I hope that's the case for me as well, because everyone around me, they're saying, I want to go to this university in the future, I want to travel, I want to go to this country. And me, I'm like, I just want to stay at home, I just want to stay in Singapore, So yeah, I think it is actually pretty amazing that my classmates, including Altia, he's able to go to Singapore and basically be away from all of his friends, and I think that's very respectable. So my 5th question to you, Mr. Sam. You mentioned you have a strong interest for sci-fi, like Star Trek, for example. How does that influence the way you teach your English?
Storytelling is a big part of it. Because if you think of some of the biggest science fiction franchises or movies or books, it's the storytelling that makes them so popular. You think of Star Wars, for example. That became so popular and famous because of the story it told. The first science fiction story is often quoted as being Frankenstein. And again, that is a really, really interesting story. What I've said to people is that what makes good sci-fi is not how wild or wacky or futuristic it is. It's actually about how human it is. Take Frankenstein, for example, that is more about the fragility of man rather than Frankenstein's monster. If you think of Star Wars, that's good and evil, the corruption of power. Star Trek also has dealt with, in its 60 years, you have to remember it's 60 years, it has told some really, really human stories in a futuristic setting. And it began in the 1960s. That's when you had rampant racism, rampant homophobia, Cold War, xenophobia, all these things. And so Star Trek told stories that dealt with these issues that made society look in on itself. And it's continued to do that. It's continued to tell some very, very human stories. Now, how that goes into my teaching is, one, the way I approach students. Not every student is the same. There's a very famous philosophy in Star Trek. It's called infinite diversity in infinite combinations. And that idea that everybody is different, everything is different, you cannot treat it the same. It's the same in my approach to teaching. I cannot treat everybody the same. People are going to access things differently. The other part of it as well is the storytelling aspect, and also there's some very, very famous quotes that have come from Star Trek. Like, one off the top of my head is, it's possible to do everything correct and still lose. And that's a very human idea. It's possible to be trying to do your absolute best, be amazing at something, but still fail. That's part of being human.
I think you taught that to me in one of your lessons.
Probably.
What was it? No win or something like?
Oh, the no-win scenario. Yeah, dealing with the no-win scenario. That's a very famous Star Trek trope. Like, there's no win-win. There is only failure. But how do you fail, and what do you learn from that failure? That is education.
Wow, that is actually something that I learned in chess. So the thing with chess is that there's always a best move in a situation. But sometimes, even if you play the best move, you still lose the game. Like, for example, if let's say we have a position, like, let's say I'm down a queen, okay, I'm down a queen in the game. There's always going to be a best move. Okay, maybe the best move is to castle your king. Maybe the best move is to develop your knight. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what you do. You're still losing the game, but you're able to play the best move in a losing position, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. In fact, the Star Trek quote actually comes from a character who was playing a game and he lost that game. And he just couldn't fathom how he could lose that game. He's an android, he's AI. How could an AI computer lose a game? And so Captain Picard, he says, it is possible to make no mistakes and still lose.
In chess it might differ a little bit because usually you start with the same starting pieces. But if let's say I start down a queen, down material, as we would say in chess, then yeah, it's going to be really hard to win. It's going to be really hard to win. You can play the best moves, you'll still lose if you're down a queen.
And this is something that education is trying to catch up to, this idea of forward failure, where you fail at something and learn from that failure that progresses and pushes you forward. And this is something I always say to people. Parents hate me for saying this because I don't believe in exam grades, because life is not an exam, life is a project. And when you work on a project, you make mistakes, you get things wrong, but you correct it, you reflect on it, you try and do a little bit better as you would any project. And so that's kind of my philosophy of education.
That's a very interesting philosophy, very interesting way of looking at it. So my sixth question to you is, I know that you have a very deep understanding of history. What is your favorite period in history? And who is your favorite historical figure?
Oh, okay, this is quite easy for me. It's the Napoleonic War era. Did you predict that? Yeah, it's the Napoleonic War era for two reasons. One, my hometown is the Medway Towns in Kent. And it's a collection of small towns that are basically connected together. And one of those towns is called Chatham. And that's had a very famous dockyard there since the time of, I think it was Elizabeth I. And it built some very, very famous ships there. And if Britain is famous for anything in its history, it's its navy. And I actually come from a Navy family. My dad was in the Navy. My brother still is in the Navy. So I grew up as a child learning all the history about the Navy. And there was one particular figure, historical figure, that I was obsessed with when I was a child, was Admiral Lord Horatio Nelson. Now, he is considered the greatest sailor in British history, even though he got seasick. But his story was a famous one. He fought at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. He won that battle, but he died during that battle. The other thing is that throughout his military career, he lost his arm, he lost his eye. Why? Because he wasn't one of those sorts of leaders that leads from behind a desk. Oh, you go do that, you go do that. He led from the front. And even on the day he died, he was on the deck of his ship, full uniformed as an admiral. And all his adjutants, his captains were saying, you shouldn't be here, you're a target. And lo and behold, he got shot in his collarbone that went right down his body. But he still led from the front. And he did a very famous signal. England expects that every man will do his duty. And duty is something that I hold dear, or at least responsibility is something that means a lot to me. And I think I learned that from historical figures like Lord Nelson, like the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. And the other part of it as well is in the mid-90s, there was a TV show called Sharp. And it was about the Peninsular War, the Napoleonic Wars in Spain and Portugal, with Sean Bean, a young Sean Bean. And I was obsessed with that. I used to play that in the backyard. And yeah, the Napoleonic War era has always been sort of my favorite period of history. And as I've grown older, I've looked at other aspects, the politics of that era, the French Revolution, for example. So yeah, it's always been something that I've been passionate about.
So my seventh question to you is, who inspired you to become a teacher?
Oh, a few people really. I can't deny my mum was a huge influence when I was teaching young children. As I say, I've taught from 2.5 all the way to adults. So when I was teaching young children, like the 3 to 4 year olds, who I absolutely love teaching, some of the things that I would say to the kids would be my mum, would be the sort of things my mum would say. So there's definitely that influence and inspiration from my mother, and also my older sister as well. But somebody who I think played a big part in how I present myself as a teacher is my chemistry teacher. His name was Mr. Poyser, and he was like me, tall. He was slimmer than I am, but he was tall, ginger greying beard, and he wore very smart clothes. He wore a 3-piece suit, and he made chemistry fun. I was not interested in science. I've never been a scientifically minded person, but he made chemistry fun. He made chemistry accessible. And also something I liked about him is that you did not mess with him. He could shout. And when he shouted, you would stand to attention. He could bellow. And he never shouted. I don't really have any memory of him shouting at my particular class, but I do remember witnessing him shouting at other students. But he made it very clear what his boundaries are. And if you cross that boundary, you will know about it. And I'm the same. Like, I can be fun, I can be frivolous, I don't take myself very seriously most of the time. But something that I hope my students are aware of is that if you get too personal, or if you start to be rude or toxic, or say things that are just inappropriate, I will tell you and you will hear about it.
Yeah, I think I've experienced
Yes,
many
you
of
have. But only once.
I think that is a very honest way of being a teacher, because you're very clear with where you draw the line, as in if you cross this, these are the consequences. So it is very honest towards the students. We live in a society where there are rules, okay? These rules are very firm, very strict. Just don't cross them and, listen to the teacher. And I feel like being a teacher is also, it's such a powerful position, because you're influencing the young minds. These people are the future, and they listen to you every single day. You can really change a person from a bad kid to someone who's going to be a good person in the future. Mm-hmm. And I think being a teacher is such an important position.
I think it's important for any teacher to first see the human being. See the human being and construct that relationship with the human being. And then you can build a collaborative work environment. I know there are some students out there that don't like me. And that's just because we're not on the same wavelength. But we've built respect between each other, that I can get what I want out of you, and we can do that respectfully. We can do that collaboratively. But that begins at seeing the human being. And life is like that. Not all humans get on. It's just a fact of life. Not all humans like each other, but it is finding that common ground. Okay, how can we work together on this? But in order for me to do that, I need to see you as a human being and see, right, what's going to trigger you? What is going to make you shut down? What's going to make you completely reject? Okay, I can work around that, but it works both ways as well.
It's a very business mindset. It's like we don't have to like each other, but we manage to achieve the greater good, and that's the only thing that matters to us. During your teaching career, have you learned anything from your students?
Oh, yes. I've learned that students are definitely more than their grades. And I shall give you an example of this. I was required, shall we say, to teach French last year. I have never taught French in my life. And I didn't learn French to become a French teacher. And certainly 11 years in Singapore has not been the right environment to practice my French. But the school had a need, and I had these 3 students. Now, I was brand new to the school, and many of the teachers warned me about these particular students. They had been expelled from another school, they're lazy, they don't do their work or anything like that. And I remember walking into that first class, and I planned the lessons and was prepared. And I just read the room, and I was like, right, these guys are not interested at all in learning French. They're just not. They were forced to choose the subject. Their previous teacher, by the sounds of it, I don't want to criticize a fellow teacher, but the previous teacher either gave up or just had not built a relationship with them. And they were failing. They were zero scoring students. And and this is another thing, not every student will pass. It's a sad thing, but unfortunately the system is built that way, that not every student will pass. And so I had to be very, very pragmatic. I had to deal with what was in front of me. If I push them too hard, I won't get them on my side, they'll fail, and it will just be hell for the next year. Or I can work with what's in front of me, build a relationship with the students, and get them to somewhere that pushes them forward. And again, I was very realistic. I was like, French is not in their destiny. They're not going to be like me and go to university to study French. They just were not interested. And so we spent a lot of lesson time wasting time. My bosses would think that as wasting time, but in my opinion, that was me connecting with the students and building that respect and building that collaboration. And even one student said, he said, sometimes I find your class is like therapy, because he would have such a bad day in other subjects because other teachers were like, and so he would think my classroom is a safe space. And we would talk about all sorts of things, fashion, hairstyles and everything. And then I would do some activities with them in French that would help them at least pass, at least get a 3. They did. And that's because not every student is a A-star or a 7 scoring student. Some students will fail. And I've got to work with the audience that's in front of me, not necessarily by the piece of paper that some government bureaucrat has decided how I should teach.
It is a common term in business. You treat the client sort of as a patient and you're the doctor. So you want to diagnose the patient, right? Because if you don't understand the patient, if you don't understand the human, like you said earlier, then how can you provide a solution that is going to accurately fix their need? You need to first understand them. Sometimes it's not just about following that hard, rigid solution. It is about following the solution that actually works. That means you know when to be strict, you know when to be lenient, you know when to be calm, when to be creative, when to just have a conversation. Because the same solution doesn't work with every student. Each student has a different need. Well, they need a different solution to get them to where they need to be.
There's something I have a master's in education. And something I remember that they kept saying in all the modules is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. And as a practicing teacher, it is so true. And as much as IB or Cambridge or the MOE or the British government system or any education system tries to devise something that's accessible to everybody, sometimes it's not. And I've worked with students where the environment is just not right for them. And you teenagers, you're pretty raw and you're quite emotional. And when you don't like something, you can get angry and you can rebel. And there was a student last year who was very, very rebellious and was being as disruptive as possible because the environment was not right for him. He was not academic, but he's gone on to do something more artistic, something more creative, and apparently is very happy. He is showing up. There's another student I'm teaching now. She is very, very creative, and she doesn't take commands very well. But if you let her be expressive, she's wonderful. So it's looking at what's in front of you and adjusting and adapting yourself to meet those needs.
I think Darwin said it as well. The most adaptable animal survives. What is one philosophy that you've learned from literature and you would like to pass this on to your students?
I think a very one famous quote. It's by Oscar Wilde from The Importance of Being Earnest. And I learned this quote not from reading the play. I learned this quote from an icon of mine called Stephen Fry, who's the most intelligent and knowledgeable man you'll ever meet of literature. And he's an actor, he's a comedian, he's a brain box. And he was at a debate about 15 years ago. And he quoted this, that on occasion, it becomes more than a moral, On occasion, it becomes more than a moral duty to speak one's mind, it becomes a pleasure. Now, anybody interested in politics would get what that means. It means like enjoying debating, enjoying sharing an opinion, enjoying discussing and talking about things. And I'm what they call in educational terms a social constructivist. Now, what that means is that I believe learning is done socially. It's not necessarily done all the time on one's own. It's done through social interactions. And as you remember from my classes, I would get you guys to discuss a lot, share your ideas. What do you think? Does anybody have a different view? Let's have a debate. Let's have one side think this, one side think that. Now go. And I think it stems from that idea. It becomes a pleasure speaking one's mind and learning whether people share the same view or have an opposing view.
Yeah, now that you say it, you're completely right. During your lessons, you did often have these sort of discussions, and you would make us get into groups, and then we would speak to each other. And it's sort of like an exchange of ideas almost. And I think the most interesting thing is sometimes, oftentimes we already have like a friendship, right? Like us three, we stay in one group. You two, you stay in one group. But sometimes you would make us, change groups. And that sort of helps us exchange those ideas even further almost.
When it's with friends, you can sometimes, if you know them well enough, you can predict what they're going to think. And you'll have things in common. That's why you're friends, right? So that's why it's important to not that's why it's important for those sorts of activities not to be with the same people all the time, because then there is not that exchange of ideas. And there's other aspects of it as well, like if two kids that don't get on are forced to work together, then they are forced to adapt and find that compromise for the good of completing the work. So that's when you begin to reduce things like bullying and that kind of thing.
So my 10th question to you is, what is your favorite character from Star Trek?
Oh, you evil person. Oh, that is such a difficult question to answer.
You want to hear mine?
Do you have one?
Luke Skywalker.
That's Star Wars, not Star Trek. You've got the wrong franchise. That's Star Wars.
Oh, is it? Andrew!
But why? Why Luke Skywalker from Star Wars? Why?
Oh, we thought it was funny if we.
It depends on my mood. I think of two. Oh no, no, there's too many. And they're from different shows for different reasons. I think of a guy called Garak, who he's very flamboyant, but he was a spy, but he's also a tailor. And he's very cryptic. He's got a mystique about him, and like this guy's a killer, but he doesn't come across as a killer. Really, really weird one. Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by one of my most favorite actors, Sir Patrick Stewart. Again, because of the quotes and the philosophies and the duty that he feels intensely to the ship and the crew. There's too many, but I suppose they're my top two, Garak and Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Now, if you're going Star Wars, I love a villain. I think they're the most interesting characters because they're the most unpredictable. What are they going to do? Are they going to be genocidal, or are they just going to be a murderer? Are they going to torture you with implements, or are they going to be psychological? And so I do love villains, and the two that I love the most are the Emperor, and the other is his apprentice, Count Dooku. Again, is played by one of my favorite actors, the late great Sir Christopher Lee, who was famous for playing dark, villainous roles. Also, he had the best lightsaber. It was a curved lightsaber. Brilliant.
Where do you think is the best starting point for Star Trek? Like for someone, maybe Gen Z around my age, they want to get into it.
Do you know what? That is something that the fans are talking about now. Fans all around. I follow several Star Trek channels on YouTube, and this is something that we're discussing, because even though the franchise has been around for 60 years, it's had a bit of a renaissance since 2017, but it's not made the impact as it did 40 years ago and 60 years ago. And they have tried to make content that's more accessible for young children, which now has been taken off Netflix and is just now in the streaming black hole. You can't find it anywhere. The other thing is, you Gen Zers, you live in a time where you watch through content so quickly that they struggle to deal with long seasons. So Star Trek back 40 years ago would have 22 episodes a season. These series would have over 150 episodes. You don't see that nowadays. They at most have 12, maybe 15. So it's very, very fast-paced and very, very dynamic. I would say to Gen Zs now, if it depends on what you're looking for. If you are looking for real science fiction, space stuff, Star Trek Discovery. If you're looking for something more, not human, but more relationship-based, more social-based, the latest series, Starfleet Academy, was excellent, but that was criticized for being too woke, whatever that means. So yeah, I would say a toss-up between Star Trek Discovery or Starfleet Academy.
Right, let's move into our rapid-fire questions. So you answer quickly, maybe 1 to 3 words, like TikTok style. Name a country you would like to visit in the future.
China. I have never been. And a lot of my friends have been traveling to China over the past year, 18 months. And I would really love to go to Chongqing. I'd really love to go to Shanghai. So yeah, China.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
At 40 years old, Star Trek. At 13 years old, Star Wars. I was obsessed with Star Wars when I was a kid. I would eat, drink, breathe, sleep Star Wars every single day. But now as I'm older and more seasoned, which is a horrible thing to say to a man, Star Trek.
Why did they start with episode 4 for Star Wars?
Very, very good question. He didn't. When the first movie came out, it was just called Star Wars. And I think because he was, George Lucas was a very, we would say artsy-fartsy director. Like he wasn't a mainstream director. He didn't expect it would do as well as it did, but it absolutely exploded. And so it's like, right, I've got some money, let me continue the story. Originally, it was going to be 9 movies, I think it was. 9 or 12, but he did the first 3. And the other thing is that he pioneered technology, special effects and CGI and that kind of thing can trace back to George Lucas and Star Wars. So yeah, going back to why was it episode 4, I think when you look at it as a whole, it's a story about family, fathers and sons. And I suppose he started off with the son rather than the father because he was making this movie for 12-year-olds. And he said, I was making this movie for kids, so who are you going to start off with? You're going to start off with the son because that's who kids love a hero, so yeah.
Would you watch the order by release date or would you watch it by chronological order?
Do you know, when I was a kid, I watched it out of order. I watched it backwards. I started off Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, then Star Wars. And then I was 12 years old when the prequels came out in 1999, so that's when I watched 1, 2, and 3. And then obviously 7, 8, and 9 came out in 2015 thereafter. It's a good question. If I had children, I think I would watch them in release order. Because there's that moment in The Empire Strikes Back, which is so one of the best moments in movie history, is the Darth Vader moment in Empire Strikes Back. If you watch them in chronological order, that part it's lost its impact. So I think watch it in release order, then that moment still has its impact.
Do you think Star Wars would have been as powerful if the writer started with 1 instead of 4?
Good question. I've never thought of that. See, it's strange because when episode 1 first came out, a lot of fans hated it, and this is where Star Wars fans are so damn toxic. They're not grateful enough for... I'm of a generation where there was a long dry spell of no Star Wars content. And the only way you could get more content was to read the books or to play the video games. And as I said, I'm a gamer, so I play the video games. And when episode 1 came out, there were a lot of fans who held so much nostalgia to the original trilogy that they just hated the prequels. Now it's flipped, that there is now so much more love for the prequels. And I think it's because it works in generations. Where were you when Star Wars came out? So if your entry into it was that trilogy, then you harbor a little bit more love for it. There's also an argument that the prequel trilogy was too political because it deals with government corruption and power being abused, where the original trilogy is more of a swashbuckling adventure.
Cats or dogs?
Cats, I have 2.
See, I told you. Historic fiction or science fiction?
Historic fiction. Oh, wait. Books or movies? If it's literature, if it's books, historic fiction. In fact, I've just finished a series, a 25-book series. It's taken me 3 years to do because I've been reading other stuff as well in between. But yeah, I've just finished a story about the Napoleonic War, and I've just finished it. And I am feeling withdrawal symptoms heavily because I've been so immersed in that character and that series. With my grade 7 and 8s, we did some historical fiction late last year, and the kids loved it. We had a lot of fun, and I'm starting to wonder what next historical fiction series I might do. I might do Dan Brown, which you could argue is a little bit of historic fiction and a little bit of science fiction, like the Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons and that kind of thing. But being such a huge fan of Star Wars and Star Trek, I do love science fiction. But I just don't tend to read a lot of it.
Final question. If you could start over again, would you choose literature or history?
History. I do love history, so I really do. But I think there's something deeper behind your question, which is something you touched upon earlier. When you're choosing your subjects in whatever school system it may be, do you choose what your family wants? Do you choose what society wants? Do you choose what you enjoy? Now, back then, I think the system geared me to choosing what was useful. If I could speak to my 14-year-old self, I would say, do what you enjoy. Because there's a big problem now, and I wonder if you guys have ever thought about this. We cannot predict, society, the planet, cannot predict what the jobs of the future are going to be. Nobody heard of an AI prompter 10 years ago. It was not a mainstream thing. And of course you have your traditional jobs like lawyers, accountants, marketing, communications. Some of those are saturated, and AI is beginning to replace some of those jobs. Marketing is done a lot by AI now. You see some of the horrible AI generated images that are sometimes created for marketing rather than pure human created graphic design. I've got a friend who's a graphic designer. I'm worried for him because he does graphic design for marketing. A lot of budget oriented companies, I'm like, okay, no, we'll just use AI. So where education is catching up, they're going a lot more skills focus rather than subject focus. So critical thinking, creative thinking, problem solving. These are skills you kids need because we cannot predict what jobs are going to be available to you in 20 years. I can't even say in 5 years what jobs there are going to be. So do what you enjoy. There's that saying, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. And if money is your thing, I mean, we do need money, but if money is what drives you, then pursue money. But if you can do without the Tesla car, if you can do without the penthouse condo, but you're waking up every day and you are enjoying what you're doing, whether you're a yoga teacher or a gym instructor or something like that, if you are doing that. A friend of mine, he is a personal trainer. He wakes up at 4 a.m. every morning and he does that no problem because he loves what he does. Me, I would struggle to wake up 4 o'clock in the morning. Not because I hate teaching, but because I always go to bed late. But when you enjoy what you do, you have that discipline and you have that passion for it.
I think that's a fantastic way to end off this interview. And you know, I'm very happy to have you speaking to me, and I'm very happy that we could share what you have spoken to the rest of the world. Yeah. So thank you for being on this interview, Mr. Sam.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.